And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the J Kick Show. And we are continuing our candidate series today with Dr. Candice Duvieilh. Sorry,
What
Duvieilh.
did I tell you?
She told me I would mispronounce it. Candice, thank you so much for joining us today. Candace is running for the 5th congressional district in the state of Alabama. She is running for the Democratic nomination in a field of three candidates. The other three candidates are Mr. Andrew Sneed and Jeremy DeVito. Candace, why don't you tell us a little about your background and what inspired you to run?
Yeah, so first of all, the last name is pronounced Duvieilh. So just like the
Do
letter V and the letter L. And I always jokingly tell people, I wasn't intending to run for office because my maiden name was Dollar, like a dollar bill. And if I had known I was going to do this, I would have kept that one. But here we are. I am Dr. Candice Duvieilh, and I'm running for Congress first and foremost because I'm a mom. I have a 2 year old daughter, and she has to grow up in this community. She has to grow up in this country. My husband is a disabled veteran. He's a machinist in the aerospace industry. We are solidly a working class family. My husband works 60 hours a week. I work full time at my job as a government accounting expert. We know what those lived experiences are like in many different ways. The longer answer to that is I am tired of watching wholly unqualified people run our country. So, with that being said, I have over 15 years of public sector experience. I've taught in Title I schools. I have a bachelor's in public policy, a master's in public administration, and a doctorate in education administration. I'm a functional government accounting expert and policy analyst in my day job. And watching our current representative and beyond, honestly, the entire rest of our government at this point, make decisions that make no sense based on all of this knowledge, experience, and credentials I have has just been very frustrating for me. So, after talking with some people, it became very apparent that this position is where I could best serve our community.
I agree with you a lot on that line of seeing unqualified people running our government. I have a master's in political science and history, so I'm really good at pattern recognition,
Yep.
and I'm not liking the patterns and recognition that I'm seeing. And we have so many unqualified people in our government. The man that is running to be our governor is probably
How did I know we were going to talk about tubs?
the most unqualified individual ever to seek that office. Say what you will about some of the scummy people that have held the office of governor of Alabama. At least they knew what they were doing.
Well, I
Um,
mean, at least they didn't need a GPS to get around their hometown, air
true,
quotes.
true, true.
Um, yeah, and that for me, I think is the most frustrating part about it is government has become a popularity contest, and it has become a situation where you have to know somebody to know somebody. And I myself have had multiple people ask me, like, well, what makes you think you're qualified to run for Congress? I am qualified to be a legislator more so than our current sitting representative and the majority of the people in Congress. I won't say all of them because there are plenty of people up there with law degrees, and I tried the LSAT. Not for me. I'll leave that to the Ashley Dunhams and Jasmine Crockett's of the world.
My sister's an attorney, and I will say this. Watching her study for the LSAT was insane, but watching her study for the bar was a whole nother experience.
Yeah,
So you have to take two tests, a test to get in and then a test to actually put it into practice. My hat's off to those
for
people who
sure.
can do it. Few people understand that the Department of Education is mostly concerned with enforcing laws that protect the civil rights of students. The department is extremely focused on addressing the rights of students with learning disabilities. The department also provides significant funding for economically disadvantaged communities. Can you please share the negative impacts of abolishing the Department of Education would have on the 5th District?
I would love to talk about that. So, first of all, education is one of the three main points in my platform. Education is near and dear to my heart. I firmly believe that education is the foundation of everything else we do in our lives. And so, for that reason, I believe that a strong education system is how we create a strong community for our children to grow up and thrive in. With that being said, your decisions being made at your local schools are made at the local school level. I taught seventh grade English in a year when the school decided that we were going to roll into a new curriculum. I tested out three different curriculums in my classroom and I made the recommendation to the school board as to what the curriculum should look like for seventh grade English in my district as the teacher in the classroom. So I cannot emphasize enough that what is being taught in the classrooms is decided at the district level. It's decided in the schools themselves. So that is the first myth that I feel is most important to debunk about schools. The second is that our schools, while we do have federal laws in place that say that our schools have to serve disadvantaged, disabled youth in their classrooms, there's the Department of Education exists to make sure that we can actually fund those processes because our local schools are actually funded through property taxes, mostly property taxes. Now, there are sales taxes that go to the state, and then we pay the state superintendent almost $500,000 a year, and then, whatever's left over after all that administrative stuff does get down to our schools. But the majority of your school's funding comes from local property taxes. If you live in an area where property values are low, your schools are disproportionately going to have less money to spend. And that is where the Department of Education comes in to make sure that you are getting the funding you need to serve every student in your district, regardless of their socioeconomic status, their ability or disability, however you want to word that. And that is what makes the Department of Education so important. Now, they do also handle, backing student loans and things like that. And we can definitely get into all of that. But the most important function is to make sure that our students are not racially, economically, or ably discriminated against.
I had accommodations from the time I was in second grade when they figured out the reason I was struggling to learn how to read was that I had dyslexia. So, and we finally got that tackled, but I had accommodations all the way through school, and it's because of, you know, laws that protected me and other students. The ADA is one of the great crowning achievements of this country to provide a more equitable society. Laws governing student when they extended ADA to students, great benefit, and it's just sad to see the attack that this administration has waged on those laws because I fear for those kids who are coming up through the system now because of the cuts to these programs that they're not going to have the same opportunities that I had to thrive and show the world what amazing humans they could be.
Agreed on all fronts. I have no notes other than just to expound upon what you've said. As a seventh grade teacher, that is a turning point in a lot of children's educational careers where they really start to determine that these children have dyslexia, that they have some sort of cognitive disability that we need to start accommodating for. And I was the main teacher in the classroom, but I worked with inclusion students on a daily basis, which are students that have disabilities that need assistance but don't necessarily need to be in a separate classroom. And I loved working with those students. I loved working with their parents, but the only thing that made it possible to fund that teacher in the room that provided those special services for those students to make sure that they could stay on track during a lesson rather than just check out and get frustrated was funding that came from the Department of Education. And that is what I think a lot of people don't understand. If a child comes into a school and they require full-time care, they require someone with them all day long, the school's responsible for providing that. I had There was a situation at the school I worked at where there was a student that suffered with incontinence because of a medical condition. The school had to provide a washer and dryer so that we could wash clothes for that student throughout the day. These are the things that I think able-bodied persons don't really think about because it's not something that they need. But when you're faced with it and you recognize that this is the reality of what we have to do to take care of the children in our society, I think the picture becomes a little bit more clear. But the Department of Education is not deciding what your children learn. They're ensuring that your children can get access to an education. And that's the bottom line.
Um, you talked about being a teacher at a Title I school.
Mhm.
And I know when they started talking about cutting the Department of Education, I knew that Jackson County, which is in the fifth district, it's where I live,
Right.
had a tremendous amount of Title I schools. I believe there's only one school in the county that's not a Title I school, and I was just blown away by that. How much federal funding could the district lose from Title I funding? It has to be a tremendous amount.
So I cannot give you an exact number on that, but what I can tell you is that there is not a single school district in Alabama's fifth district that does not receive some form of federal funding. Even our most well-funded school districts receive between 30 and 40% of their funding from the federal government. So when you're talking about the further outreaches of our district, which is Lawrence County and Jackson County, you're getting up to 70, 80, 90% of funding is coming from the federal government. So if we cut the Department of Education, that funding is going to get cut too, because that's where it comes from. The Department of Education administers those funds. And there's plenty of people that say, oh, well, the main pieces of it will move it under the Labor Department, which is crazy in and of itself. But education funding is its own thing that requires its own specialists and its own budget. And we need that to be its own entity.
I will tell you the thing that scares me more than the Department of Education getting cut is if they move it to HHS and that lunatic Robert F. Kennedy gets in charge of education in this country because that's he's scary.
I now I'm going to say something that my campaign manager is probably going to be like, stop saying things like that. But every time I see RFK Jr., my brain processes it the same way it processes like a South Park skit. And that like I can't take it seriously. And it's that has been a dissonance that I've had trouble rectifying.
I find it I find it hard to believe that he's a cabinet member now and a cabinet member in a Republican administration because I remember when he was back in 2004 and they relegated him to like Sunday night at like 10 o'clock on Air America Radio. And he was screaming about, Bush calls 9/11 and all of this other stuff. And I'm like, he's working in a Republican administration now. It's a wild.
Um, who is the comedian that said the same thing about our current president that was just like it's Donald effing Trump, right? Like I feel like that's happening across the board and that's why, that's why I'm running, Jake. Like I am running to give people the option to choose qualified, capable people. My biggest goal in all of this is to bring calm to the chaos because right now all of these people in power are thriving on ignorance and chaos. And I refuse to do that. And there's a lot of times where like breaking news will happen and I won't post about it until I have enough information to give people things that will either calm them or let them know that there is a plan, there is a way that we can rectify this, there's a way that we can work towards fixing this in the future. Because I don't ever want to make people feel I don't ever want to make people's blood pressure go up. That's the bottom line. I want to bring a sense of calm and comfort to the conversation.
That is so true. I should live by that sometimes, but unfortunately, I
It took me a long time to get here. Okay. It took me a long time to get here. And I think that's something that's unique to the millennial generation. We're very introspective. We're very like, I'm responsible for my emotions and I need to handle that, right? But it's taken a lot of work. And you can't log onto the internet without seeing someone talking about the work it takes to do it.
Republicans claim to be pro-life, but cut funding to vital services for children and young families. You have a robust plan for supporting growing families. Can you please share how cuts to these programs negatively impact the Fifth District?
So, wow. There's so many pieces to that particular question because the fifth district is so vast, right? We have these portions that are very affluent, and then we have portions where there is no, housing is scarce, there's no jobs, there's areas like that as well. We have portions of our district that don't have access to broadband internet, right? So, cuts to these programs are only going to increase the income disparities in our district. I have spoken at length about how much I love living in Huntsville, living in this area with all this innovation and all of these engineers. And jokingly, it's the first place we've ever lived where my husband will say, "I work on rockets for a living," and people are like, "Who doesn't?" And that I think that's kind of funny. But one of my biggest things that we need to do is make sure that we are spreading the wealth throughout the district. Because if we continue to concentrate everything in Huntsville and let Huntsville gobble up the areas around it, all of these low income, disenfranchised areas are just going to become more low income and more disenfranchised. And cutting these programs that would help us to lift them up is going to, again, just exacerbate that problem.
Well, that kind of borders in on my next question because the next question I was going to talk about how that there are parts of the fifth, like you said, like Huntsville, that are very, very affluent, and then you've got other parts, like some parts of rural Jackson County, that are just economically destitute. And I was gonna, we were gonna talk about maybe the economic disparity. Um, but I want to talk now kind of about health care in the fifth district. I sometimes find that voters fail to understand that the impact of a hospital closures in a neighboring community could impact their health care. Can you tell us about maybe the health care situation in the fifth district currently?
So, the healthcare situation in the fifth district has actually kind of sucker punched me and my close friends over the holidays. One of the things that physicians and people in the healthcare industry across the fifth district are concerned about is that our infrastructure is so weak and carries such a heavy load at certain times of the day that if you have a heart attack in some of the rural parts of our district, you will not make it to a hospital in time to survive that incident. If you are working on a Columbine in Jackson County or Lawrence County and get your arm ripped off, you will likely bleed out before you can make it to a trauma center that can actually service you, right? In Jackson County, I think it's even more of a big deal when we talk about Highland Medical Center, right? It is also the largest employer of people who live in Jackson County. So if anything were to happen to that hospital, not only would you lose immediate access to care, but you're also going to lose a lot of jobs. So it would be economically devastating for the area as well. Um, so the healthcare thing is very intertwined. Huntsville Hospital in Huntsville, in the center of Huntsville, is the only level one trauma center between Nashville and Birmingham. So if anything happens to anyone in the surrounding areas of Huntsville, they're going to be bandaged up and transferred to Huntsville either by helicopter or by ambulance. And they have to survive that transition to make that happen. All right, do you have something to say?
I will say this. Longtime listeners know where I'm about to go with this next topic.
Okay.
But back in November of 24, I had a health emergency. Um,
Oh,
and my mother's an ER nurse and she works in Tennessee. And we did not go towards Scottsboro and Highlands. We went towards Tennessee and a hospital there, and I went on from there to Chattanooga. And then in February, I had a surgery at a level one trauma center in Chattanooga. There was no way that I was going to, insure that to Scottsboro or Highlands. No
mhm.
disrespect to the wonderful physicians that work there, but I could not put my life and the care that I needed in those hands. And I am incredibly thankful that I had the opportunity and had the ability to seek service out of state. But those people who don't understand or the ability to quickly get to those other places are are in a bad shape because on our end of the county, from my house to Huntsville is maybe an hour and 15 minutes. It's 45 minutes to Chattanooga. So
And that, so decisions like that have to be made. Now, everyone knows I did not grow up here in North Alabama, but I got here as quickly as I could. I did, however, grow up in a very rural part of South Mississippi. And the local hospital there, the all of the locals referred to it as the Band-Aid station. And you do not go there unless like you genuinely have no other option. If you can survive the hour trip to New Orleans, just go to New Orleans. And and I think that is something that is experienced throughout this country right now, right? So I appreciate you sharing that story with me. I actually have a dear friend of mine who actually passed away on New Year's Eve because she had a heart attack in rural Alabama and did not make it to the hospital she needed to go to. And as that being something that I have used as a talking point for months now, to have that happen so close to home, it was the most affirming thing of why this work is so important, right? Because it's not theoretical. This is stuff that is really happening to people in our district every day. And again, there's certain times of day where if traffic's backed up because people are trying to get into or out of Huntsville, you're not going to get to a hospital. It's just not going to happen. So we have to make sure that we are putting laws in place that ensure that people have access to the care that they need, that people have access to emergent care. I won't bore you with all of that. But one of my biggest things that I want to do is amend EMTALA so that insurance companies have to bear the cost of emergency services. Because right now, insurance companies are not paying for emergency care because they know that legally hospitals will provide it, regardless of whether or not it gets paid for. And it's one of the reasons that emergency rooms are losing money because they're not getting paid for the services they're providing.
I remember back when we had the government funding fight, and people were talking about, Trump was using the demagogic language of providing health care to illegals. And my mother's an emergency room nurse, and she's talking about Impala. And I use this example, and people in my community were like, "Oh, you're wanting fun illegals." I'm like, "No, no, no. If you go out in the middle of a street and are hit by a car and they take you to the hospital, they're not going to check your citizenship status. They have to provide the services to save your life." And talking about traffic, that's another thing. If I had gone from Scottsboro to Huntsville by ambulance, because I went from the hospital to Chattanooga by ambulance when I was transferred,
Mhm.
I would have hit Huntsville traffic about the time Redstone Arsenal starts getting backed up. So, and they didn't know what the hell was wrong with me at that point. So it was a pretty intense situation, and I that was I was already very much on the left at that point. But that whole experience pushed me further to the left on healthcare policy in this
And
country.
I'll tell you the other thing about this is, and not even to the extreme of like, there's always money for war. Why is there no money for healthcare? We have enough money. Like, there is money in the budget. They're just spending it on the wrong things. And I've said it throughout my campaign. How our government spends our money, because it's ours, it's our tax dollars. How our government spends our money is a direct reflection of our national values. And right now, the way our government is spending our money is not reflecting the values of the majority of the people I interact with.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but the president a few hours ago announced, talking about money for the budget, that he is requesting that next year's military budget, which we know it will be more than what's requested once Congress gets their hands in there, $1.5 trillion. That is that is insane. What do you believe is an underappreciated issue that is not getting enough attention that is going to be a huge issue in the near future?
Uh, in Alabama's fifth, sewage treatment
Nationally.
facilities.
What was that?
Sewage treatment facilities, public sewage treatment, public water, things like that. That is something that I have talked to many sitting elected officials who have told me that our water systems cannot handle the pressure that they have right now. And we have people coming here in the thousands, and it's only going to get worse. And no one's really setting aside money for maintenance or renovations of those structures. Uh,
That
huh?
is actually something I had not heard. And I will say this because I had read when they announced Space Command on Axios Huntsville, which if people aren't subscribed to it, you should. It's a really great breakdown of local news in the area. That um, Mayor Battle had said that they had the sewage infrastructure to handle the influx of people. So they are misleading people moving here?
Huntsville, maybe.
Oh my
But Athens, Ardmore, the county, Triana, all of these other areas, no. And that is something, it's first of all, they're misleading people. No, color me shocked. But this happens, and one of the things that I'm really hung up on right now. It's one of I see Dale Strong's talking points, and I just kind of makes my skin crawl. But one of his biggest ones right now is that he secured, I think, like $12 million or something, very small amount of money to update the sewage treatment facilities in Ardmore because Ardmore lost water pressure because they were using Limestone County to supplement what they needed, and it became too much, and Limestone County cut them off, and it was this whole back and forth. So I went and looked it up. Based on the current population of Ardmore, that is enough money to get them to where they need to be right now. But by the time the construction is done in 3 years and Space Force comes here and Eli Lilly comes here and the expected housing developments for building in that area come here, it's not going to be enough. And they're going to be right back here where they started. So that's one of those pieces where I say a understanding of public administration, an understanding of urban development, and an understanding of government accounting is so vitally important because right now they throw big numbers at you. Like Tommy Battle said, I have $380 million for road improvements. Well, we've done the math on that, and that's enough to expand maybe 19 miles of roadway if you don't have to enact eminent domain, which they're going to have to. So all of these numbers sound amazing, but what our area needs is a true urban plan that allows for bypasses, that allows for potentially HOV lanes and public transportation and bike lanes, so that not only are we increasing the amount of roadway for vehicles, but we're giving people options outside of vehicles being on the road. Because if we can put people in buses, if we can put people on bikes, then we can get cars off of the road and attack the issue from both sides rather than just constantly playing catch up.
That is a very true statement. And I am one of those people that I see all of this growth happening in Huntsville. And my fear is that in 10 to 15 years down the road, we are going to be, I like growth, but my concern is we're not going to have the space to put these people. We're going to be, they're going to be living in trailers that are temporary, and they're going to be stacked high in those temporary trailers. Like, do we have a
Like the oil
plan?
fields in West Texas.
Right. And also, all of the growth to me seems to be happening on the west side of Huntsville. There's no growth coming out to the east side on my end. So I don't see any benefit from all this growth in Huntsville in my community. I'm like, well, everybody talks about Huntsville being this great place to live. We're not seeing, any of the residual effects out here in Jackson County. I'm sure limestone is.
One of the things that's very interesting to me, and I see the dynamics because I read the comments, I want to know what the community is talking about. And for the most part, if you see someone talk about increasing downtown infrastructure in Decatur to attract more people to live there, the comments are largely people being like, yeah, let's do it. Like, we have this waterfront, we have all this, blah, blah, blah. But if you see something out of Scottsboro that way, the majority of the comments are people saying, nope, nope, we don't want you here. And that to me is an interesting dynamic because I get why people feel that way. I get why you want people to stop coming here because you're not getting any of the benefits, but you're dealing with all of the headache, right? So for me, I say that we just need to future proof and we need sustainable growth. One of the biggest things that we're seeing is people, if you look at a map of the fifth district and you look at the average commute times, the further you work out from Huntsville, the longer those commute times get. I know someone personally who drives an hour and 15 minutes one way from the other side of Scottsboro to work here in Huntsville and back every day just because he wants to be able to own the land and he wants to be able to live that kind of rural life. So I think these outside counties, if we were to spread some of the corporate wealth, as it were, get some of the jobs out of Huntsville and into these other areas, it actually would benefit because now you're talking about the people who want to live that rural farm 10-acre life, but not having to commute an hour and a half to get to work every day, right? So there's balance. And I think that that's an important piece of it as well. And I mean, we've seen success. Gunnersville updating their waterfront area, I think, is something that Decatur can do as well as Scottsboro can update what they've got going on because Scottsboro is an amazing place.
That is that is a good thing, and we look forward to seeing you in Scottsboro here in about a week. Uh, what is going to be the effect of all these Medicaid and Medicare cuts on the fifth? I saw somewhere, I believe during the Big Beautiful Bill fight, that 53% of all births in Alabama are funded through Medicaid, Medicare. What are the effects going to be on women and young children in this district?
So I have actually talked to some of our state representatives about this. I talked to them about it back when the Big Beautiful Bill was still being debated before it ever got passed. Because I did my deep dive into the Alabama state budget and I know how much money Alabama spent on Medicare and Medicaid versus how much the federal government spent. And by the end of the year, it works out to be that the federal government is really paying 85 to 90% of our Medicare and Medicaid costs in the state of Alabama. That is the bottom line. If we spend $1 billion, the federal government is paying, 900 million of that, right? And so we have to understand that when we start looking at these cuts. There is no amount of cuts at the federal level that is not going to affect our access to healthcare in this state, just because purely by the numbers. So it's going to cause, again, just exacerbate all of the existing problems we have. We know that the maternal mortality rate in the state of Alabama is higher than any other state. We know that that's even worse when you start talking about Black women, right? So all of these problems are going to get worse. Women are not going to have access to the obstetric care that they need, and we're going to see it cause, a lot more complications that in turn will end up harming our children. A lot of people don't know that, NICU stays for babies, a lot of times that can be pulled out of Social Security to pay for that, to cover any cost that Medicaid's not covering. This is all things that have to be taken into account, and it's an issue that's being caused by a multitude of things. But any cuts at the federal level to Medicaid, Medicare, anything like that is going to affect our state and it's going to hurt our people more. Full stop.
I could not, you were talking about the maternity mortality rate for Black women in this state. And I know that in some counties, it's a matter of going maybe an hour out of the county to get health care. But in the Black Belt, you could have to go from your home to Montgomery or Birmingham, and that's a 3-hour trip.
Mhm.
Um, and you're one, you're away from your home and your family and your community and your support group, but also that means that those people staying with you are going to have to take off of work to be with you and then find accommodations to spend that extra money to stay with you and help support you. It is just such an utter catastrophe of what we are putting poor people through in this state by cutting this funding from supposedly the party that calls themselves pro-life. Now, we know that's not true. They're not pro-life, they're pro-birth, but
But even with that, and this is where the frustration comes in for me because a lot of people don't understand what maternal health care actually looks like, depending on who the mom is. Yeah, for the most part, in a healthy pregnancy, you would go and get an ultrasound every 3 months, check in with your OBGYN, make sure there's no questions, everything's normal and it's fine. But if you have what they call a geriatric pregnancy, which, hey, medical community, we don't like that term, pick something else. But if you have that, then you get to a point where you have to go to the doctor every week. And if you're a high risk, if you have blood pressure issues, if you develop gestational diabetes, you have to go every week. Once you reach the 32-week or 36-week mark, you have to go every week. So if I have to drive 3 hours to get to that care, how am I supposed to maintain a job during that time, right? So even I can't even say they're pro birth. They're just pro existence of babies, right? And I've said this and I could rant about it. Women produce the greatest resource a capitalist society needs, which is laborers. That is at the end of the day for that our babies are seen as statistics. And I made a post about it, and there were a whole bunch of people that came in my comments and were like, "Oh, she just sees a baby as a statistic." No, I see my baby as a human, which is why I'm running for office. I see them as a person deserving of autonomy and deserving of an opportunity in this world. You don't see them that way, and that bothers me.
preach, preach, preach.
Sorry, I got a little ranty there for a minute. I'll dial it back.
I will say this. I'm a former Republican and at times espouse Republican beliefs. But there was several events that caused me to become, more liberal and now a full-fledged lefty. Um, and
Welcome to the club. We're glad to have you.
thank you, thank you. Um, I just the Republican arguments about abortion fall flat on their face when you examine them because I wasn't planning to talk about abortion, but here we are. Um, it's not about saving lives. It's about controlling women, is what it's about. Like you said, you know, pres autonomy over their own body and autonomy over their own self. And you raised something that I hadn't thought about, raising laborers. And that is a scary thought that maybe one of the reasons the Republicans are so pro, pregnancy and pro producing, kids is to help their big corporate donors. I had not um, gone down that rabbit hole. So
Well, I forgive you. I'm a woman, so I think about this all the time. But truthfully, in a very just pulling all of the emotional out of it, view from nowhere kind of way, the conservative, the people in, I won't even say conservative because I've met conservatives and they would never agree with this, but the people in power, their need to control women producing babies, I believe firmly, comes from the same place that makes them make sure that they preserve mineral rights of land that they sell. You can you can build on it, you can live on it, you do whatever you want with it. But if there's a resource involved that I need for my company to be successful, then I get to step back in and take back over.
that is a new perspective, and I am going to that is a new argument I'm going to use in my argument when I get ranted up about choice. What are voters telling you is the most urgent issue they are facing?
Man, in this world, it seems if you're looking at the big picture, if you're looking at everything that's going on with ICE and Venezuela and all of this, what voters are most concerned about is traffic. They are tired of sitting in traffic, and for good reason, right? Because when you're sitting in traffic, your frustration is not that you're sitting in the car. Your frustration is, I could be at home with my family, right? I don't need to be sitting in this car for an hour and a half. I've been at work 8 hours already, or 12 hours if you're my husband. I don't want to spend another hour sitting in this car. I want to go home. I want to eat dinner with my family. So the frustration is completely valid. But honestly, in the fifth district, that is the number one thing from Hartselle to Scottsboro that I'm hearing people upset about because you can't get to either of those places without going through the choke points.
That I will say this, I have ADD, so traffic and having to wait for something is not a good combination. And I am both hands on the steering wheel. Now I'm a 10 and 2 driver, but I'm a maybe a 12 and 1 when I'm in traffic. And I must say that traffic is so annoying because you see all of this, construction work going on the roads and no improvement. Like the roads are still, to use a term of French, shitty. So, um, I I had not thought about that. I was thinking you were going to say affordability. That was, but
I mean,
traffic,
and yeah, obviously affordability is something everyone's talking about, but here in the fifth, the first thing people complain about is 565. Obviously, affordability is something people are concerned about. Affordability is something I'm concerned about. People are terrified about dynamic pricing, as they should be. And I think the way that we address that is going to be consumer protections. We have to protect consumers to make sure that they're getting what they're paying for, that shrinkflation is not happening. I think there's a lot of things that we excused because of supply chain issues during COVID that we have just been expected to accept as the norm. Like there's a lot of things that just didn't go back to normal. And as a mom, I noticed that. As a person, I noticed that. I noticed that there's little bits of gross parts of green beans in my can from Del Monte, right? That just didn't used to be there because the quality assurance is going down. And if the quality assurance is going down, what are you letting into my food? So I think that there is a bunch of different facets to addressing affordability. Right now, we got to deal with this tariff problem.
yes. And talking about dynamic pricing, that scares me, not just because when you get to pick up something off the shelf and it says 250 and by the time you get to the register it's $20, but it is the further encroachment of AI into our lives. And that to me is an issue I think we've really got to get a handle on because I think we are going way too far without saying, wait a minute, not can we do it, but should we do it? And that's
So
how,
let's talk about AI for a minute because I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I don't believe that it's an all or nothing thing as well. I think AI is just the next in the available tools that we have in our lives. So AI is not here as someone who does a largely administrative job where I am building out tutorials, making documents, responding to questions from clients, things like that. I am not in any way concerned about AI taking over my job, and I'm in at least 4 meetings a week talking about how AI can help our company. So that is something that I think we need to dial back the fear on that a little bit. AI is going to supplement our jobs. I also believe firmly that we are on the precipice of what I'm referring to as the technological revolution, but I think that's already a thing, but it just feels like we're reaching a point where we are about to cross over into the next phase of what being a working class person looks like. So when the Industrial Revolution happened, we went from people working 15, 20-hour days to the 8-hour workday because we automated things, because we created assembly lines, right? Now we've reached a point where we have all these tools at our disposal. We have remote work capabilities. We have the ability to work on the go. We have the ability to use AI. And I think we're going to see a large shift in how our work days happen. And just like at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the people who like us working as long as possible, being productive for their company, are not huge fans of that sort of change. But if we've reached a point in society where you can use these tools and get 8 hours worth of work done in 4 or 6, that doesn't mean that you're worthless. That just means that you can use these tools and have more time to enjoy life outside of work. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Talking about, automated factories and such. I remember back when Trump did the first round of tariffs, and I saw somebody that was in the manufacturing industry on TV talking about, he says, I don't think people understand that even if all these factories locate on American soil, it's not going to bring jobs into the country because you have factories now that could be workerless. And basically all you have is security there for to get let the truck drivers in to pick up the finished product because they have robots building everything. And
That's what I was about to say. They have robots that will literally walk down the aisle, climb up the shelf, grab the hunk of metal, and then walk it over to the machine, set it in the machine, and the machine just knows what to do to turn that hunk of metal into whatever bracket or whatever it needs to be. I'm not a manufacturer worker. I've just talked to them. So, but they have robots. They even have robots doing the security bit too. So, you know, I AI is not going to take our jobs, but it does have the potential to make our lives easier if we band together and fight for the regulations that would make that possible.
I don't know if you've ever seen this video, but a couple years ago at a consumer electronics show, they had a dog that was like a robot dog that was a security device.
There's facilities here that use those. Yeah.
And I was watching that and I'm like, has no one watched The Terminator? Has no one watched like all these science fiction,
Yeah, but you don't have to worry about it falling asleep in the middle of the night either. So, I mean, I totally, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that I think is one of the biggest things with Katie Britt all over Facebook talking about how we must regulate AI. Awesome. You passed a bill approximately 8 months ago that made it to where we couldn't do that. And I
Yep.
had one of my friends who's also running for office posted on TikTok about this today, and I was so glad to see that she did because it has just been every time I see it show up in my feed, it makes me want to scream because read the bills that you're voting for, understand the implication of what you're voting for before you decide to turn around and start crying wolf is really what it is. And I can't that is something that really frustrates me. Don't walk it back. And if you're going to walk it back, own that you made a mistake. Say, I accidentally voted for this. I acknowledge that I did something that would hurt us, and now I have to figure out a way to reverse that.
There is a great scene in Fahrenheit 9/11 where Michael Moore is talking about the Patriot Act, and he's interviewing Congressman John Conyers, and he's, asking, "Why did you vote
I
for this
haven't thought
bill?"
about Fahrenheit 9/11 in years. Oh my gosh. All right, you're taking me back. All right,
And
keep
and
going.
he's talking about all these horrible provisions, and Conyers is like, we don't read most of the bills that we vote on up here, and it's like, oh my God, like I understand that the individual member might not vote on them, but you've got to have staff that are dedicated to reading the bill and giving you an honest assessment of what's in those bills.
Yeah.
Um,
And
what?
that's what it is. And I am not the kind of person that assumes that I'm going to get up to Congress and I'm just going to do nothing but sit there and read legislation all day. But I will make sure to surround myself with experts that can do that and can advise me and can help me. And I sure, yeah, yeah, those one-off, everyday bills, that's fine. But the annual budget bill, I think I'm going to look at that one. The 1,000-page defense spending bill, I'm gonna need a minute to read this because there's something fishy in there, right? And the blind voting. is also a huge problem. Just voting however you're told to vote. In Katie Porter's book, she talked about how when she first got to Congress after winning her district in California, she was told by another member of Congress when she wanted to start like writing a bill or whatever, she was told, your job is to be the 245th vote or whatever. Like, that's your job. Outside of that, we don't need to hear from you. And Katie Porter, being who she was like, that's not going to work for me. And then, of course, she made herself famous with the meta, hearings and things like that because she's a very intelligent woman and she wasn't going to be told to wait her turn. She wasn't going to be told how she was going to vote. And I think that's very admirable because that mentality of your job is to just be the last Democratic vote or your job is to be the last Republican vote is the reason we are in this problem right now.
I am a big advocate of two things. One, I'm an advocate of raising the salary of Congress because I believe that keeping it low disincentivizes working class people from running for Congress because of you have to keep a house in the district and you have to keep a house in Washington. And it also makes it to where most people in Congress could do other things at a higher salary. So it drives people away from investing time and serving, and it also incentivizes people doing all this insider trading. But also, these people are running our country. They are running the greatest Fortune 500 company, if you want to look at it that way, ever, and they deserve to be paid well, commensurate to what they're doing. Second,
That's a
I am
very
a
hot
huge,
take, Jake. There are not a lot of people that would agree with that.
and I'm also a huge advocate of hiring a lot more congressional staffers and paying them well as well. Because if we're going to have a functioning Congress, we've got to have people not only in the elected position, but in the support position who are intelligent and incentivized working up on the Hill. So
Yeah, that's a very unpopular opinion, Jake. But I can tell from what you just said that you've done your homework and really looked into what all of these things cost. Because I hear a lot of people say, and this is another place, this is like the $12 million or the $380 million, where people who've never actually looked into what it costs to do this, that sounds like a lot of money. So you get $2 million, right, to run your office in Congress, but you have to maintain offices across your district, right? You can, it's not just one, and you have to staff those offices, and you have to staff your office in Washington, D.C., and you have a staff that travels back and forth from Washington, D.C. to your district with you. And there are travel stipends involved with that, and there's a lot of money that comes out of that. If you were to ask any private business, and I am not by any means saying that government is run like a business because it's not. Businesses turn profit, government does not. Net positive for the community. I know all that. But if you were to ask any company to run multiple offices and staff multiple offices for 2 years in two very different ends of the country with required travel at least 6 months out of the year with $2 million, they would tell you you were insane that it can't be done. So, yeah, I think that you're on the right track with that.
and another thing that you mentioned there, other ends of the country, you're a congresswoman or congressman from California. Your district office is 3 hours behind you in Washington.
Yeah.
That's the huge time difference you're talking about. You could be in Washington dealing with something that morning, they're still asleep out at your district office and are going to have to deal with that throughout the day. And you're going to have people in Washington working late into the night to service, run things up the pole. So, we're lucky
There
here.
was that was something that was interesting for me about reading Porter's book again because she's in California and she almost did not make it to qualifying for her second term because of the amount of time it took to travel from Washington D.C. to California. Her plane would not land before or until after the office closed in Sacramento for her to go file her qualifying paperwork. And there's a lot of different, I think there's a lot more nuance to what that should look like based on geography. And that's something America brings that a lot of other countries don't, is that we are freaking huge, right? So there's that piece. But I like your take on it, Jake, because most people are just like, pay them less. They're making too much as it is. They're making too much on the insider trading deals, right? They're making too much on the gifts from lobbyists. They're making too much on their campaign donations that they funnel through an LLC that then gets paid out to a different one that ultimately leads back to their bank account in some way or another, right? That's where they're getting all this money from. And I've been trying to explain that to people. Like when Katie Britt, Dale Strong, all of them were like, if military's not getting paid during the shutdown, I don't want to get paid either. And it's like, okay, well, that's cute, but you're worth $20 million. So losing your paycheck this month isn't going to hurt you. Now, that military family, they're going to end up with late fees on their electric bill.
Um, talk, they're the only people that can vote on their pay, and they have not raised their pay in 17 years.
Well, yeah, because
2009,
public opinion is very negative about that.
and it's absolutely maddening. I wish that if you wanted to show political courage, one of the things the Congress should do is raise their own pay. And if I was a congressman, I'd defend it this way. I'm like, Congress hasn't raised their own pay in 17 years. And if you vote me out because of this, I'm not going to get the benefit of it
Yeah,
because it doesn't go into effect until the next session of Congress.
interesting.
Um, what is a story from the campaign trail that has inspired you? Likewise, can you share a moment that has depressed you?
Wow. So this is going to sound possibly really corny, but I am inspired on a regular basis by the people that I'm talking to. So one of the biggest focuses of my campaign that I kind of promised myself and promised to my supporters from the beginning is that I wanted to go into the spaces where community members are already doing the work, right? We know that we have a housing problem. So I want to go talk to the organizations that are addressing the housing problem. We know that we have an affordability problem. So I want to talk to the organizations that are addressing food insecurity. I want to talk to the organizations that are addressing inequitable education and all of these things. So, what I found going into those spaces was a lot of what I have referred to as joyful resistance. They are fulfilled in knowing that they are taking steps towards solving a problem rather than just being angry that the government is breaking everything. And that to me was very inspiring. Just watching people do the work and derive joy from that and not allow the anger of the moment or the emotion of the moment to take that joy away from them. I love watching that. Now, the other part of your question, like I said, my friend that passed away on New Year's Eve, I think that has been the most impactful moment for me because this person was a very inspirational individual. She was one of those kind of people, and I know people always say this after someone passes away, but she was one of those kind of people that just always brought light into the room. And she was an avid supporter. She was one of my biggest advisors because she worked in the healthcare community. And her death was a direct result of one of the things that I'm fighting for most. That was extremely impactful. So, and also sad, but a little mix of both. But now we carry on her memory and we continue the fight.
I'm sorry for your loss. Losing loved ones is always a dramatic experience. And I hope that I'm not religious, you may be, but my thoughts are with you at this time.
I appreciate the sentiment and thank you for that. And I'm not trying to garner sympathy, but it is definitely the most impactful thing that has been on my mind, most because it happened a week ago. So
Yes. Um, so this question may seem condescending, but it's not. Why should Democrats vote for you instead of your opponents in this primary? Jeremy brings a military background into the campaign. Andrew brings in a business perspective. You bring in a perspective from education. Why should voters choose you over them?
So it it's a common misconception about me that I can't match those credentials coming from there. So I was raised by a man who ran a commercial concrete and steel contracting company. I lived that my whole life. In my 20s, I started an HVAC repair company, which is still successful to this day. I handed it over to the other owner because I had other callings in life, but I have ran a business before. I've ran payroll, I've done taxes, and I know what it's like to fight for government contracts, and I know what it's like to process that paperwork. So I have an extensive understanding of business. My husband is a disabled veteran. We deal with the VA. I have processed a VA home loan. I am still fighting to get his disability where it needs to be and doing those sort of things. So I also have that understanding. So while I do not have personal experience as a veteran, I do have personal connection to that. But beyond those things, I am extremely qualified to hit the ground running on day one. For the majority of freshman congresspersons, there is a 2 to 3 term, so we're talking 4 to 6 year learning curve for them to really understand how policy is written, how to understand the language, how budgets flow, understanding where the money's coming from, where it's going, and how all of these different bureaucracies work together. That is a learning curve that is not going to affect me. And while I do not believe that every district across the United States needs a policy and government accounting expert at the federal level, I firmly believe that ours does, because there is nothing happening in this district that is not directly affected by that funding. We have grants, we have Smithsonian, we have defense spending, we have defense contract spending, we have aerospace spending, we have NASA, Marshall Space Flight Center, USDA spending with our farmers, USDA spending in our schools, Department of Education spending in our schools. That is a lot to keep track of, and it is something that I have 15 years of experience doing.
The fifth district runs off of federal funding and the federal government. Um, it is largely due to former Congressman Robert Jones and Congressman Bud Kramer. Uh, Congressman Parker Griffith, before he became a Republican and then came back to the Democrats, I think may have continued that. Mo Brooks certainly didn't do jack shit while he was up in Washington, D.C. And Where's Dale hasn't done anything either. Without
What?
our,
He's been in the same room as Donald Trump so many times. You don't find that impressive?
no,
I have
it's
sarcasm just for all the viewers.
Uh,
Sarcasm.
unfortunately, the fifth district now has to rely on Katie Britt for our federal funding. So it would be nice to have a member of Congress back in the fifth who understands the importance of the federal government to our district. And I think Candace just laid out a very compelling argument for why Democratic voters should choose her. And as like I said, voters are free to choose. And I think we have three amazing candidates running.
Participation is the hallmark of democracy. Regardless of who you vote for, show up and vote because it is your power. When you vote for somebody, you are handing your piece of the power over to that person that you're voting for. You're saying that the power of my voice now lives in you to win this office and go make decisions on behalf of my family. That is nothing light. Participation is the hallmark of democracy. Get to the polls and bring a friend. Bring 4 friends. However many seats there are in your car, put friends in them.
I think Dale Strong, also talking about this, may be the only member of Congress ever in his reelection campaign, because this will be his third term if he gets reelected, third term. He did not face opposition in the primary, and he did not face opposition in the general election in 2024. And we have three Democrats running this time against Dale. So that is tremendous. And hats off to all three of you for putting your name out there and giving us an option and an alternative to Dale. Thank you so much. Um, Candace, where can voters find out more information about your campaign, to make donations, to possibly volunteer, and your issue set?
So I am Candice for Congress on all of the socials except for Facebook, where I'm Candice Duvieilh for Congress. And I am on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Substack, YouTube, and I think I'm even on Reddit, though still trying to figure out how to use that. And you can visit my website, CandiceDuvieilForCongress.com, Duvieilh. I assume Jake will put that in the show notes because it's not an easy one to remember how to spell. Just recognize it on the ballot. That's what I tell people. But you can visit my website. You can sign up there for a 15-minute chat with me if there's something you specifically want to discuss about your lived experience. You can sign up to be a volunteer. You can sign up for our newsletter, and you can also donate and invest in a campaign if you choose to. There's also a little bit of merch. There's some cute t-shirts out there too.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Candace. A quick note to listeners, we will continue our candidate series later this week. We're going to have Hanu on to talk about Republicans in Alabama's assault on the rights of naturalized citizens. We are going to have on Dr. John Dickey later. He is running for state senate. We are going to have on Dr. Will Boyd, candidate for governor in the Democratic primary. We're going to have on Dr. Jack Ziblak again to talk about the car wreck of a mess they got going on over in Northwest Georgia with the resignation of Crazy Marjorie and the fact that the village in Georgia has found their crazy lady again now that she's resigned from Congress. So we'll continue the fun. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to Candace for joining us.
Thanks, Jake.
All righty.